I think I've started recording.
Of the current trend in humanities research, as well as the need to find good ways of knowledge sharing and dispersal. It is why I find the topics which our illustrious guest presenters are going to illuminate today very apposite. I'm very confident that we are all going to have enriching scholarly sessions, which will no doubt renew our commitment to quality research output. It will be my joy that the stimulating sessions today will lead to wholesome endeavors, so that when we look back, we can attest to the significance of our participation today as having engendered positive results in our individual careers. On behalf of the Vice Chancellor and the university management, I wish us all a good time. Thank you very much. You are all welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
You're most welcome.
Dr. Nanga, unmute yourself.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry. I thought I was. Yeah, so I said we will be moving on from the welcome address by the Dean. And we don't want to take too much time, so we kick off right away. But before we do that, I would want to provide some insights, what I'll call a few ground rules. So we'll have each speaker. We have 3 speakers, and so each speaker has 30 minutes for their presentation. But because we know they are very busy people too, and we don't want to hold them down, we'll have questions to each presentation immediately after the presentation, in case people have things they need to, go and attend to. And so ask these questions, please. Signal by using the hand raised button. And then, of course, you could also type into the chat so that we know what questions you're asking and to whom these are directed. And our presenters will also provide their presentation slides for access so that after the presentations, after today, people can have direct access to some of these used for their personal work. And so to introduce Professor Rotimi Taiwo, I would want to call on Mr. Raphael Lara-Etan to provide his brief bio. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good day, everyone. I have the privilege of reciting basic profile of
Unmute yourself, Mr. Lara-Etan.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Professor Rotimi Taiwo is of the English and New Media Studies at Obafemi Awolowo University, OAU, in Ife, Nigeria. He started his academic career. At Adeyemi College of Education, Ondo, in 1995, and later transferred to Obafemi Awolowo University, Ile-Ife, in 1997, where he rose to become a professor in 2011. He specializes in discourse analysis, pragmatic lexical studies, and new media studies, and has over 100 academic research articles and books published in these areas. At different times in Obafemi Awolowo University, he had served as the coordinator of the use of English, the editor of his departmental journal, at least Ife Studies in English Language. He also served as editor at Ife Journal of Humanities and Social Studies. And at the time, he was the head of the Department of English Language. He has also been an Alexander von Humboldt Fellow and visiting professor at the University of Freiburg and University of Munster. both in Germany. He was also a visiting professor at Covenant University, Ota, and Olabisi Onabanjo University, Agoiwoye, both in Nigeria. Professor Taiwo has been involved in mentoring several young scholars and encouraged them to win grants and postdoctoral fellowships and publish in high-impact journals in the field of language studies. This we heard from Dr. Ononuga a while ago. He has served and is still serving an external examiner to several universities in Nigeria, including the universities of Ibadan, Lagos, Ibadan, Jos, Benin, Ilorin, and Redeemers University. At the time too, he has also served as external examiner at the Osun State University, Ekiti State University, Adekunle University, Bowen University, Macpherson University, Bessie Dausa University, and Ajayi Crowther University. He also served as a member of the Board of Regents, that is, the University Council of Landmark University, Omuaran, Nigeria, between 2019 to 2022. Professor Taiwo's hobbies are reading, of course, traveling, playing indoor games such as Scrabble, crossword puzzles, and Mastermind. Friends, make welcome Professor Rotimi Taiwo. Thank you very much.
Okay. Good morning, colleagues. It's my pleasure to be here this morning as one of the speakers in this webinar organized by Federal University of Oye-Ekiti, Department of English to be specific. I want to appreciate the organizers of this meeting, and I believe it's going to be a rewarding time for all of us. The whole idea is to ensure that we rub minds together in order to be able to improve on our research skills, to gain more visibility. What I'm going to be talking about this morning is doing research that is relevant to contemporary times. As we all know, times change. We have to change with time if we want to be relevant. And I believe everyone will understand along with me that the times we are in are quite different from the last maybe 20 years, at least for me as an academic. I've spent almost 3 decades in the academia. So I have the opportunity to be able to compare times when we came in and now the way we are doing research. It's a world of difference. So maybe some of you so young in academia, you may not be able to see much difference because you are people born in the millennia, and you have seen some of these things that we'll be talking about as the normal things. But for those of us who have been here for quite some time, we know that times have changed. So we want to start. I want to first present an outline of my presentation, and that's it there. We want to define research. Why is research relevant? What makes research in contemporary time different? Because if we don't talk about these things, there's no way we can possibly understand why we need to do research in a different way. And then digitization of research, and then the new media and research. And I will close. So I'll move on to the next slide. That is the definition of research. So what is research? We want to Well, I got this definition from Department of Education and Training, Western Sydney, University, Australia. The research is the creation of new knowledge and or the use of existing knowledge in a new and creative way so as to generate new concepts, methodologies, and understandings. And this could include synthesis and analysis of previous research to the extent that it leads to new and creative outcomes. So the point we are making here is that research is a creative venture. So if you have never seen yourself as a researcher, as a creative person, I think you should start doing that now. And then what do you create? Knowledge, because we operate in the knowledge industry. And from time to time, new knowledge has to be created. Well, research can be divided basically, generally into two: academic research, which is our own concern in this talk, and then applied research, which industries and government agencies carry out in order to solve real-world problems. But we are engaged in academic research. That does not mean that we don't also apply our research to real-world problems. In fact, I want to believe that whatever research you do that does not impact on the real-world issues may not be too, well, I won't say authentic, but you may have to rethink on it. So we always make sure that whatever we do is geared towards advancing knowledge and understanding a particular subject or field of human endeavor. So that's in a nutshell what we mean when we talk about research. But what are the key issues to note when we do research? A meaningful research should normally involve the increase in the stock of knowledge. Like I said earlier, since we deal with the knowledge industry, our goal is to ensure that people know more about some particular issues. And then the ultimate goal of research is development. And if we have to make our research valid, it has to be systematic. That is, it has to be based on very clear and appropriate methods of data collection and analysis. And of course, we know every discipline has a way of systematizing the collection, the analysis, and the presentation of the research data. So let's move on to the next, please, next slide, please. What is the relevance of research? I've said it earlier, is a tool for building knowledge base and facilitating learning. So if you are involved in a research, you are improving on knowledge and you want learning to be facilitated. It keeps us abreast of latest issues in a field of study. If you want to really know much about a field of study, the most recent ideas, you dig into the research that people have been doing in recent times. And if it means to also understand issues and increase public awareness, I mean, I've said so much on that, so I don't need to dwell on that again. Now, research also helps us to succeed in business. Like I said earlier, in businesses, people engage in research in order to help them to plan and to improve on their products and services. It also allows us to disprove lies and support truths. So if we are not sure of the veracity of anything, where you need to go to get the idea, the correct idea, is research. Because we believe when people do research, we are authentic. Whatever they present is tested and is valid. And so it's easier to just draw on that to support whatever we need to say about anything. Research also gives solid foundation to build ideas and opinions upon. These researchers can speak with confidence about what they know is accurate. And it's because of the validity upon which you base your research. That is why we can say research is, something that we can always rely on. Now let's move on. Researching in contemporary times. Well, I'll try to do a kind of comparison, a comparative view of what research now is and what research then used to be. Contemporary research benefits from advanced technology. That is apparently true because in the past, the technology is not so advanced, and the likelihood is that you might need to verify whatever somebody puts forth. But with the advanced technology, the data collection is faster, is more efficient, and more accurate. So the accuracy of research in contemporary times can be, ascertained. And then we also have tools that help us to gather and process information. And then doing research now gives us insight into larger sample sizes. We have, in the past, we could be limited in the way we did research because we will only be able to pick from samples. But now we can have a large sample, which is called corpora, and then we can systematically analyze them. So now moving on to the real characteristics of research in modern times. The first one I'll be talking about is interdisciplinarity. Unlike research before now, which focused typically on single disciplines with limited collaboration across fields, contemporary research emphasizes interdisciplinary collaboration. That is bringing together researchers from different disciplines to address whatever problems or challenges we're addressing in research. Interdisciplinarity is so important that a researcher should actually consider it because knowledge is connected. And we are moving on to the next issue, which is, open access and collaboration. There is no way we will talk. Okay, let's leave it. Knowledge is connected because one aspect of knowledge cannot be totally divorced from others. I remember when the field of discourse analysis started becoming popular in Nigeria, or when it got to Nigeria. I happen to know the first person to have PhD in discourse analysis, which is a field I'm in love with. When the idea came to our department, it was vehemently resisted because people, especially people I would call purists, are stuck to the old way of doing things and they don't want change. They didn't want change, rather. So they resisted it. But Professor Femi Akindele, I'm sure some of us would have heard or read some of his works, decided to insist. And before long, it became accepted. And today, the rest is a story, because we know how far discourse analysis has gone, how much it has evolved over the years. Almost everybody wants to do discourse analysis now. And sometimes some of us are getting worried that it seems there is no other field that people are interested in except discourse analysis. So that is it. Open access and collaboration. That also characterizes contemporary research. We don't get involved in closed academic work. We want our work to be open to everybody, and then want to collaborate with other people. And many people don't seem to understand the whole idea of collaboration, because they thought maybe collaboration can only be done within your own discipline, that is interdisciplinary collaboration. But the truth is that collaboration can be done with people in any discipline. And that's why you hear about literature and medicine, discourse and medicine, which are two different fields that nobody would before now think could ever meet at any point. So as somebody in language, you can collaborate with people in other disciplines, in law, in medicine, in pharmacy, in computer science, and so many other disciplines that will not ordinarily be linked with language studies. And then your work can be more open. You know, people can have access to your work without much stress. Then we also talk about reproducibility and rigor. Contemporary research emphasizes reproducibility. That is, you can reproduce what someone has done, but now with stricter standards and guidelines, and then rigor to ensure reliability and verifiability of the results. Then let's move on to another feature of research in contemporary times. Contemporary research is not limited in diversity or confined to specific geographical locations or institutions. Rather, people can collaborate, across borders, and then that enriches the research and gives us diverse viewpoints on the subject that we're talking about. Meaning that you don't have to restrict your methods to what is popular in your area of research, in your discipline. You can reach out and bring methodologies and theoretical framework from other disciplines that will help to enrich your research. Then another thing that characterizes research in contemporary times is greater ethical consideration. As we all know, it's not very hard to detect copyright contents in research. So there are enough facilities and platforms that will easily help us to know the originality of any research. All you need to do is just apply this. And because of this, you find a lot of people who would either to just go somewhere and copy of existing works to be easily detected through plagiarism checks and other means. And then we're able to tell them the extent of the originality of what they are presenting before us. So let's move on to the next thing, and that is rapid dissemination of information. In the internet era, of course, we know that information is easily disseminated through online platforms and social media. I'll still talk more about this. Now, many journals are moving online so that researchers can publish and share their research efforts. And then they get more visible to the research community. So let's go on to, yes, artificial intelligence and automation. We all know the challenges people have now and the benefits that they can get in harnessing the use of artificial intelligence. Of course, we are not oblivious of the fact that a lot of people negatively use artificial intelligence to generate essays. There are ways of ensuring that these people don't go scot-free. Then research must be focused on something that is sustainable. So we talk about risk and sustainability in research, and many authors seem to be looking more at research that focus on environmental impact, on climate change, and this help to emphasize, significant shifts based on our experience in modern times. So now let's move on to the whole issue of what makes research relevant today. What will make your research relevant today? Because that's what we're talking about. It has to be driven by digital platforms from the conception to the actualization. Now, we all know how much every nation is trying to drive the digital economy, which encourages using digital platforms. It has revolutionized our lives in such a way that almost everything we do today is, guided by digital platforms. And this includes research. And we can see why we are collecting our data, when we need to store, of course, storage of data, the description of digital contents, the visualization of our data, managing the references, our data references, and then writing tools, how we can use some online platforms to write our research. And then, of course, the visibility of our research. For instance, in the past, you might have to really manually, do things manually in such a way that at some points you may miss out on some of your references. But with Mendeley, with EndNotes, and some other platforms like that, you can ensure that you have all your references captured. And then I will talk more about academic visibility tools. Let's move on to the next slide. So what makes your research relevant today? It has to be based on issues that are globally relevant to researchers across disciplines. If you want to publish, you have to think about issues that are current globally, such as globalization, which has been with us for quite some time, and then COVID-19, a very recent experience, which has transformed our world, and then environmental sustainability, which we are still, dealing with all over the world in the developed and underdeveloped or developing nations, and conflicts and violence. We're also dealing with that in every nation. Human migration, of course, as a Nigerian, we know how much of migration has taken place in the last few years. Then popular culture, ethics of artificial intelligence, urbanization, social media communication, gender and sexuality, multiculturalism, digital humanities, and so many others. You know, somebody might want to ask, as a scholar in English, how do I relate my scholarship to all these things? Well, these are some of the things that we need to read on very well. And I want to tell you that language is relevant to any of these things that we have talked about. Literature is relevant to them. So you can always find a way of forging a link between language, literature, communication, and some of these topics that I have talked about. That's not to say that you cannot do research in other areas. If you are a purist and you just want to say that, okay, if I have to do any research on language, it has to be syntactic, it has to be phonological, and it has to be morphological or whatever, you know, the so-called core aspects of language studies. But the truth is that you can still relate these core aspects to some of these topics that we're talking about. Or you're in literature, all you want to think about is how to analyze a text and then bring out whatever is foregrounded and then try to interpret the meanings, you know, stylistically and all those stuff. But let's remember that there are still ways we can link even some of these so-called core aspects of language to some of these areas of research that I have identified. Let's move on to the next. Okay, now the new media and the research. There's no way we'll talk about research without talking about the new media. I know there are still a number of people who don't know how to forge a link between their research and the new media. There are new media platforms that, I mean, generally new media platforms helps us to foster interactions online. And unlike before, research needs to be, you know, interacted with. Researchers need to interact with themselves. And when they are in a community, they are able to discuss research outputs and then, you know, give feedbacks to authors of such papers. Online platforms promote news, education, marketing, and branding. And talking about education, you know, it's almost impossible now for any institution to exist without maintaining a website. And such websites are not just there for the fun of it. They are there in order to market the institution. Of course, through the marketing of individuals and branding of the institution. So online, I mean, new media helps us to reach out to wider audience. Let's move on to the next slide. And what makes your research relevant? I've talked about it. Number one is it has to be collaborative. If you want it to be relevant, it has to be of global relevance. Topics that are, you know, global relevant. It has to place a lot of emphasis on real world applications. You know, you cannot just do research for the sake of doing it. You have to bring in some elements of interdisciplinary approach and multidisciplinary approach. And then you have to be able to share your research and receive feedbacks from people. And you have to be conscious of ethical considerations in research. And then you have to, very, very importantly, you have to think about your research impacts. Because when you publish, I want to believe that you want people to read. And when people read, they are impacted by it. Some have to, cite your research in their work. So, and that is how we measure the impact of your research. If your research is not used by other researchers, and you've published for about a year or two, nobody has cited it, nobody has read it, then it means there is something you need to look at again in that research. If you have a good research impact, your research profile should portray that, and when you have a good research profile, then you have the tendency to attract funding for your research if you approach research. I want to please, let's move on. I'm almost done. The last, I'm going towards the last slide now. Let's move to the next slide. I want to appreciate everyone for listening to this, and I will be very much interested in getting your feedbacks in terms of questions, comments, and anything that can improve on this discussion that I just shared with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you so much, Prof, for the engaging discussion. I know that people are yearning to ask questions. And so if you have questions, please either type that in the chat box, or you raise your hand and then we allow you are allowed to speak. And so I can see Olaiwola raised a hand before. Is Olaiwola there? Okay, well, in the absence, while we wait for other people to raise their questions, I have two questions for Prof. Sir. The first is about the challenges of AI, particularly when you speak about chat GPT, chat PDF, and how students use all of these in their research now. I mean, what ways would you advise researchers to use or integrate some of these into their writings? And these ethical? And then the other side is the use of software like RStudio, for instance, in analysis. Most people in the arts or humanities in Nigeria are people who have this phobia for figures. And so all of a sudden you encounter this software. So how do you navigate that? So thank you, sir. Is Olaiwola still there? Okay, Prof, maybe you answer this.
Do I take all the questions, or unless there is no question, then I can move on? Otherwise, I'll prefer to just take all the questions and then.
Part of the chat GPT and it can be a question.
Yes, maybe you answer those, and then if there are some other questions, then we present them to you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Of course, we are all aware of the challenges of artificial intelligence in research nowadays. And many a times, some of us feel it's very easy for people to write essays by using AI. And how do we ensure that whatever essay someone presents to you is authentic and original? We just finished assessing some candidates for a scholarship in OAU here, funded by some Nigerians based in the United States. And we asked them to write an essay, and they wrote in fact, almost flawless essays. Many of them were not original. And by the time we subjected these essays to some, platforms that are known for giving us originality, the extent to which essays are original, we realized that some copied directly from many other sources because AI is meant to help you to get ideas or whatever you want to write on. It's not meant to provide you what you're going to copy and give out outrightly. It seems many students are not aware of this, so they just feel whatever suggestions AI gives to them is the valid thing. And because, of course, they are lazy, not that they don't know, because they are lazy and they don't want to think and write in their own original thinking, they miss out on this point. So my advice to people is, we cannot say you don't use artificial intelligence. You can explore it and it will help you a lot, but don't just copy anything that is suggested by AI, because whatever you call artificial intelligence, some minds are behind artificial intelligence. So you need to, like I wanted to even say in my presentation, the extent to which you're original is very important. If you have a PhD, you are aiming towards getting a PhD, you are supposed to be an original thinker. And whatever you bring out must be seen to be only associated with you and not something that, because when everybody uses AI, ChatGPT, what happens is that by the time you are reading through their essays on the same topic, you are likely going to see exactly the same line of thoughts. And then you start wondering, apparently, you know that these ideas were copied from a source. So that's my response to AI. Well, for those of us who are assessing students, we have to be very, very alert, very much alert. We should not take whatever students write just as on their face value. We need to scrutinize further so that they won't be credited for what they don't deserve. Then the use of software. Yes, in the humanities, many of us have phobia for figures. And then some of these softwares might bring some figures, quantitative, and all those stuff. And someone like me will be lost because I have had that phobia since I was a child. I'm just trying to get over it as an adult because I realize that there is no way I can do without figures sometimes. But your work does not always have to be quantitative. Maybe a little bit of quantitative and but for some of us who are able to do a lot of quantitative studies, why not? You can leverage on the use of software to help you in doing your quantitative analysis. So that's my response.
Thank you, Prof.
Yeah,
exactly. I wanted to draw your attention.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, it's gone already. Please, can you read the question?
Yeah, well, the first one was by Moses Rutsimi. And the person asks, what are the parameters for judging research that has global relevance? And I think it's allied to this last question here, who's asking how, okay, yeah, maybe you are attend to that, Prof. How do you judge a research that has global relevance?
Okay. Yeah, how do you judge research that has global relevance? Of course, this is a relative thing. So, but I think to a large extent, you should be able to, number one, think about what's the topic you are looking at. Because topics go a long way in allowing you to, probe into something that will be of interest. Because when we talk about global relevance now. We're talking about something that will be of interest to a community of scientists and researchers, you know, something that is not too narrow, of purely local issues. Of course, that's not to say that local issues cannot be thrown into the global spheres, but you have to make it interesting enough for people out there. In other words, if you are doing something that is of local, that is within the local frame, you need to ensure that you provide enough background for readers so that some things will not be hanging. And maybe by throwing such local issues into the global sphere, you will actually popularize it, and it eventually becomes a global idea. So when you write, you don't write with assumptions that people know these things. And that's why sometimes when people write for some journals and they are sent to us, and mostly, of course, Nigerians, you realize that they are taking a lot of assumptions on what they're writing on. And as a result, the editors of the journals may not be able to publish it unless those things are better explained and then thrown more, more light is thrown into them so that somebody who is not familiar with the idea.
Okay.
So that's my.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Very briefly, Infinix Smart 5. Yeah, just quickly ask the question. We've spent too long with, yeah. All right. Go on. Infinix Smart 5, you have the floor. Oh, well. So two last questions so that we move on to the next presenter. The first says, considering originality and undergraduate long essay writing, would you advise that undergraduate long essays should be scrapped because it's hardly anything original that most of the students are contributing? And then the last question is about interdisciplinarity and its perception as being a form of digression from one's research focus.
Okay, thank you very much. The fourth question is on the undergraduate long essays. That
Prof, you are muted.
Sorry, the first question, originality of undergraduate essays, long essays, should it be scrapped? Because usually it's not. Of course, you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We still need to engage our students. I witnessed what's the experience of this person. And what I do is to make sure that they still continue to bring something more original, So whenever I see something beyond the students, I confront them. I just subject to plagiarism check and then show them that this is not your original work. And they don't have a way of, they can't defend it, of course, because it's obvious, it's objective. So we need to continue engaging them. I think they should write, they should still write, but maybe we should limit what they write. We shouldn't be expecting something so much because it's a long essay and not a thesis, so to say.
Gary.
Okay, then interdisciplinarity, that sometimes it could be seen as a digression from your original discipline. I don't think so. I think it enriches the original discipline because no discipline can stand on its own. We have to connect all disciplines. And that's why when the PhD is given, it's an indication that you as somebody who can reason and who can present views, on existence, on values, and then you have been trained to be able to argue, to present an original stuff. So there is no way we can say if I start mingling, if I start connecting English with medical sciences, then I'm gradually leaving the studies of English language. Of course, that's an idea from a purist, and I think we should resist it. All things are connected. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. And if we go on with answering questions, we probably won't give room for other presenters. So thank you very much. For the other questions, unfortunately, we won't be able to take all because we've spent an hour already. And so at this point, I would want to not only appreciate Professor Rotimi Taiwo for his very insightful discussions, but to also move on to the next presenter, who's going to be Professor Kali Kwedzi, journal editor, Journal of African Cultural Studies. But before she starts, I would want to call on Mrs. Olubumi Adejumo to read our citation. Ms. Adejumo, are you there? Wow. Is it the network acting up? Okay. Let's see. Ms. Adejumo, are you there? So maybe I'll have to take up the responsibility so that we don't take too much time. Yeah, so okay. 1 minute, please. I'm trying to open. Yep. Okay, so there we go. Professor Kali Kwedzi is a research associate at the African Studies Center of the University of Oxford and a research fellow at the African Literature Department of Wits University, African Literature Department of Wits University in South Africa. She has previously held positions at the University of the Western Cape, University of Cape Town, SOAS University of London, and Queen Mary University. She's also taught courses at Peking University and Tsinghua University in China. She's the editor of the Journal of African Cultural Studies and chair of the Lagos Studies Association Publications Committee. She is the current president of the African Studies Association of the United Kingdom, ASA UK, and a monograph written Under the Skin, Blood and Intergenerational Memory in South Africa was published in 2019 in the African Articulation series of James Corey, Astro Boydell, and Brewer, and it won the African Literature Association Best Scholarly Book Award. You're welcome, Professor Kali Kwedzi. Please share your thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Onanuga, for the invitation and also for the welcome. I see a number of people in the room that I have worked with and interacted with. I wish we were all together, but it is great to be here via the Zoom platform. I'm going to make a few comments, but the most important one that I want to make is a voucher that I have asked Dr. Onanuga to circulate after my talk, because the point that I want to make is a scholar based on the African continent never, ever, ever must pay to read an article that's published by Taylor and Francis, the publishers that I work for. So this voucher will give you access to the entire Taylor and Francis catalog of all the thousands of journals that they publish. So that's the first point, because my presentation is going to tell you that the way to become a better writer is to be a better reader, to read as many well-written, published articles as you can is the best way to improve your own writing. So that access voucher is something that you can register for, and you don't have to be secret about it. You can share it with your colleagues, with your friends, with others in your department, and as many people as is possible can use it. It's one of the reasons I work for Taylor and Francis, because they make this voucher available. I think it's highly political and it's highly important. The second thing is you should never have to pay to publish an article. In other words, as a scholar, money need not change hands. You don't have to pay to read. You don't have to pay to publish. It's really important. If someone writes to you and says, I've read your wonderful work, we would like to publish your article, and they ask you for money, you know those are 419 boys. Run. Do not give them your work. Do not send them your material. A good journal will not invite you, and a good journal will not ask you to pay. So the way to find out where to publish is to read as many articles as you can, to go into the archive. So you need to find a day when you know your connection is strong, your electricity is reliable, and you sit down and you just go through. And then when you've got that access, your second best friend is a memory stick. When you find things that are relevant to you, download them, because you'll be surprised next time you won't find it again. We always think, oh, I'll remember, but of course we don't. Our lives move on. So let me make a few remarks about why we publish. So in an interactive session, I always like to ask this question. I won't do it now to you, but of course we publish because we want to be read. We want our work to reach an audience, and we also publish to improve our lives, to improve our careers. Some scholars who publish in my journal write back and say, I now have an apartment on campus. This publication has changed my life. There are stories like that about where an article or a set of articles can transform someone's life. These are the reasons why editors like myself stay involved in the work, because it's very political and it's it's heavy. Being able to publish articles is a heavy, heavy job. So think about where you want to be in 5 years' time. It's hard to know where we will be in 5 years' time, but try to inform yourself about what that committee will want. If you want to work at Obafemi Awolowo University, find out what that department requires. If you want to work at UI, make sure you know what it is they want. If you want to apply for a SSRC grant, look at other people who have won that grant. Inform yourself of how people have crafted a CV. I want to say something about the relationship with a supervisor, and this is difficult terrain, because I know that there are differences in different settings, but I want to say some tough words about your supervisor relationship. Some supervisors are wonderful people, and their scholarship and their mentorship enable us to become scholars and human beings. But some supervisors are not mentors, they are more like tormentors. So in the humanities, we generally have single authorship. This is really important. For my journal, the single authored article is the standard. Every now and then I will publish an article with more than one author, but it's very unusual. So I think this is something that is very often encouraged in the Nigerian Academy to have a group of people. Some journals may like that. Most journals will not like that. supervising a thesis or reading someone's article is not a way to get a publication. So can you imagine if every person that I mentored I co-authored, I would have 1,000 publications by now. Reading someone's work and commenting on their work does not qualify you to be a co-author. So co-authorship is something very specific. In the sciences, it's very common. In the humanities, co-authorship is not very common and is not encouraged. When an article submission comes into the journal that I work for with multiple authors, I often do a bit of research to find out who all these authors are. I do a lot of that kind of detective work. And if I see that one of the authors is very senior and the other author is a PhD student, I will write to them to say, whose work is this? If it's the prof, please can the prof submit it? If it's the student, please can the student submit it? We don't, at my journal and most Taylor and Francis journals, like these blended collaboration articles that are supervisor and student together. This is also one of the things that we are activists for in Lagos Studies Association, sorting out that young scholars publish under their own names and take control and authorship of their work, rather than co-publishing with senior scholars who are their supervisors. That's not co-authorship, that's something else. So as young scholars, I can't see the faces of who's on the call, Dr. Onanuga, but from the names that I do recognize, I know some of you are young, either just finished PhD or still doing the PhD. This is a really difficult terrain, and sometimes you need advocates and people to talk this through with. So this is one of the things that Lagos Studies Association does. There's also networks of PhD students across Africa. There's a group that I admire a lot called Doing a PhD in Africa. They've become a bit dormant. Maybe the people who were in charge have mostly finished their PhDs, but they're these groups. Then I want to say something about turning your chapter into an article. A thesis chapter is a very different animal from a journal article. You cannot simply submit a chapter from your thesis just like that as a journal article. It will need substantial revision. An article needs a nice story. It needs a particular kind of argument. It needs to make an intervention and a contribution. In a thesis, they're long sections that are just padding, where you show that you've done the work. You show that you are aware of previous scholarship. But in an article, you have a few words and you have to use those words very effectively. Because you don't have time to waste. So to learn to write good articles, as I said, I recommend you read as many articles as you can that are in your field. Am I right that most people on this call are in literary and cultural studies, or maybe linguistics as well?
Yes, very.
Okay,
very right, yeah.
So I can tell you what your journals are. Professor Rotimi Taiwo will be able to tell you more about the linguistics journals, but for literature journals, it's Journal of the African Literature Association, Research in African Literature, Journal of Literary Studies. There's a few of them. English in Africa. They're the ones to read, they're the ones to look at, and most of them are Taylor and Francis journals. So some of us are lucky and choose good thesis topics, and those people are very fortunate. Some of us have rubbish thesis topics, and it's really difficult to move forward then. If your topic has been chosen well, your PhD thesis can be the basis for your research for the rest of your career. This is a common pattern in the USA because at US universities, I was not trained in the USA. I was trained at an African university. And for me, there was no coursework. I was just thrown into the library on my own. I think that generally is also the pattern in Nigeria, that there's not a training period, but in the US, there's an excellent training period if you're lucky. America, the US is also not, it's not like it's the best place to be. You can end up at a university where you don't have a single supervisor who'll be able to put a pin in the map of where Nigeria is. So don't think that in America, just everything is great. I've seen people who sink when they go to the US because there's no one who knows anything about their topic. So I want to caution, as one of the topics that Dr. Onanuga asked me to talk about is how to create a strong research profile. And what I want to say is the most important thing is create an area of scholarship that you are going to specialize yourself in. You sometimes see young people who publish one article on ecology, one article on children, then there's one on music, then there's one on Afrobeats, then there's one on traditional medicine. It's like, who is this? Who is this person? Is it even one person? And the reason I say don't do that is because you waste so much time. For each new topic you choose, you have to become an expert in everything that's been written. Much better, use your time really well and start building for yourself an archive, build for yourself a profile, so that when you write when you start developing new topics, you are building on work you've done before. That's why people at universities in the US can often publish so much compared to those of us who are placed in different institutions. It's because they specialize. They follow one path and they stick with it for a number of years so that they use their time really well. It's expensive time-wise and financially to start a new topic. And I know why we do that. Often we jump between topics because we're following money. There's a little grant here or there's a call here. And so you jump. But I think you're not doing yourself any favors because you just become a nothing scholar. You become someone with a CV and with a list of publications, but no identity, no distinguishing features. You want to be someone who's known for a particular kind of scholarship. And I could name you the names of people, I'm sure you know them as well, who've done that and who are known for a particular kind of work. So when you start turning your chapters into journal articles, I know that you've just been reading and writing for years, but now I want you to have a targeted reading project when you start making your thesis into journal articles to see what has been said in journal articles about your topic. Very often I will read an article and the bibliography ends in 2015. I was like, okay, I know this thesis was completed in 2015 and the person hasn't had time to go back to it. When you turn your thesis chapter into an article, you have to update the bibliography and you have to refer to the most recent work that you can find. And so the thing that I did not know about, that my children taught me about, is Google Scholar. I'm sure you all know Google Scholar and are familiar with it. In a few minutes, Mr. Google, Uncle Google, can bring together for you all the things that have been written on a topic. And even if you can't access all of them, you'll be able to read the abstracts and you'll be able to see what the topics are that people are writing about related to what you were thinking of. So when you write an article on like a recent, on a novel, for example, you need to know the other articles that have been written on that novel. Originality doesn't mean writing as if you are the first person ever to think about a topic. Originality means knowing what others have said and having something original to say in response. So that's really important, to be published in a top journal like African Notes from Ibadan, like Journal of African Literature Association, English in Africa. Those journals will require of you to have read other things on the same topic and to be able to refer to them. So your second task, after you've done your Google search and seen what other people have said, is to think about what journal you want to publish in. And this will typically be a journal you yourself admire and read. You have to treat the choice of the journal like a research project in itself. It means going through previous issues, reading as many abstracts as you can, selecting the ones relevant to you and to which you can respond in your own article. Choosing a journal is the most important decision you make in the life of your article. And if you choose the wrong journal, even if they publish it, your article just dies in the corner, like an animal that's not fed. You need to publish your article somewhere where it will be read and where it will be engaged with by people who are interested in the same topics, and who will in turn cite you. You want to become a world-known scholar on a particular topic. So you want to write your article in such a way that it shows you are aware of other things that have been said. So looking at how to write your journal for your article for a particular journal means you go over how do they like their bibliography? What do their abstracts look like? What kind of topics do they publish? You must imagine yourself as a member of a family. Like you're going to walk into a room and you're going to start talking, and the people around you are talking about similar topics. That's how you have to position your article. One can learn so much by reading a journal like a detective, seeing what it is they do, what do they like, and you can see the kind of sentence structures people use, and you can follow those. You sort of you practice. You know, it's like any other job. I don't wake up and I say, guys, I'm a pilot. From today, I'm a pilot. Obviously not. You have to go through a whole lot of training. The same with writing articles. We can't just because we're smart think, oh yeah, I can write an article. There's a whole lot of practical stuff that you can train yourself with, that you can learn, empower yourself. Yeah, I think that's the most important thing. Empower yourself. Look through stuff in a way that you take charge, and see what it is you want to do. So we all come from particular academic and scholarly traditions. Prof. Taiwo made some very useful comments about this. When you want to publish in a particular journal, be informed about what kind of debates they have. So, you know, if you publish in Yoruba studies, you know there's going to be a whole lot of stuff that authors who publish in that journal do. If you publish in the Journal of African Literature, you know there's a whole lot of stuff those scholars do. Every journal has a kind of body of work and a way of approaching a topic. Inform yourself so that your article doesn't arrive and all the articles look like dogs and yours looks like a giraffe. You know, you have to look like the other stuff that's being published in the journal. I also want to encourage you, do not try to write the article that the person sitting at a well-resourced library in New York can write. That person will write a particular kind of article. Don't try and write that article. Write the article that person can never write. In other words, make your specific knowledge and your specific location your strength I hope I can't see people's faces. I can only see 1 or 2 people who are, animate. I understand why this is the case, but it's very difficult to just talk into a nothing. But the really important thing is, do not try to talk as if you come from nowhere. Don't try and write as the nowhere scholar. Write as the person who is writing from where you are, so that what you write has the authenticity and the locatedness of where you are. Write the article that person in the good library in New York will never be able to write, because they just don't know the stuff that you know. Write an article that makes new knowledge. Sorry, you don't have to keep your cameras on. I was just saying Zoom is a weird thing. You can switch off your camera. Write the article that makes new knowledge available about something that's not yet been written up, about practices that have not yet been documented. Make use of your knowledge and your networks. Think about that person in New York or Delhi or Beijing and what they may not know. So when you write for my journal, for example, don't start. Nigeria is a large country on the West Coast. Thank you. We all know that. You don't have to start with all of that stuff. See what a journal needs to know and write intelligently for that specific journal. Some tricks with accessing books. I don't know if this will work in Nigeria, but here's a tool that I use a lot. I have the Amazon Kindle app. I don't buy the books, but I order the free sample. And with most expensive theory books, if someone knows whether this is true or not, whether you can do this in Nigeria, I'd be very curious to know. But I don't buy the books. I read them either on Google Books, as far as I can go, or I read the free sample on the Kindle app. And in this way, I remain informed about new scholarship without having to spend a lot of money. Basically, I want to teach you all the tricks that I use to do research without spending a lot of money. Kindle apps, Google Books, correct. The person who asked the question, yes, those are the things I'm talking about. Don't buy the Kindle book. Do not buy the book. Just get the free sample. If you have the app on your laptop, it will say, you don't need a Kindle reader. It's just on your laptop. They will ask you, would you like to see a free sample? Yes, please. And they always send you the introduction. And the introduction always has the whole argument in it. There you go. You've got it. You've got access to it. I wanted to say a few words about rejection. So at the journal I work for, I can publish between 5 and 10% of the submissions I get. Between 5 and 10. That gives you an idea of how high the bar is. Sometimes an article will be very well written, but we've just published an article on something very similar. So then I'm not going to publish another article on that. Or another article has just been published in another journal on a similar topic. No matter how brilliant it is, I'm not going to publish it. So there's certain things, a topic comes in, it may not be the best article, but no one else has written on it. We take it forward. So there are reasons why articles get turned away. So for my journal, don't send me an analysis of one book. Don't send me an analysis of one film. For Journal of African Literature Association, they say, thank you very much. This is wonderful. This is exactly what we want. So different journals want different things. See what the journals want, write your article into that particular desire. So for the Journal of the African Literature Association, they want articles on novels that are maybe not so well known. don't send them an article on half of a yellow sun. They've published 40. Don't send them an article on things fall apart. They've published 100. Think of an article that does something new, something original, something that people wouldn't know about necessarily. A successful article is clever, polished, well-written, memorable, and makes an intervention, says something new, does something new. So the kind of article that I think would be incredibly useful, and all of you will be able to do it, is to go back to the debates that were happening in African literature departments or in literature departments in Nigeria in the 60s and 70s. Like the stuff that was happening at UI in the 60s and 70s, in magazines, in pamphlets, an article that looks at what kind of courses were taught in the 60s and 70s, going into those archives that the person who's sitting in New York cannot access. Those are the kind of articles you can write, and that will be really interesting and really important. I hope I've made that point clear about not writing the nowhere article, but writing the somewhere article, the article that's linked in to what it is you know, and to the archives you can access, to the knowledge that you can access around you. I'm going to stop there. I can talk for hours, but I will stop here, and then I will take some questions, Dr. Onanuga.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Kwadzi. I mean, it wasn't less than we expected, and particularly because you also shared your insights based on your experiences and the things you encounter on a regular basis. And thus far, I mean, we've been progressing from conceptualizing the ideas, which was what Professor Rotimi Taiwo spoke about. And we've moved on to how these ideas can be concretized in terms of journal outputs. And Professor Kwadzi has, been very revelatory. She's spoken about the very first thing that we have to do, which is to read, because that's the only way that we can reduce these thoughts into actual writing. And then, of course, look out for the kind of journals that suits the kind of work we are looking to push out. And then, of course, ensure that these journals are the ideal homes for the kind of writings that we've generated. And of course, I remember, the kind of experience I had with that, and it was really nice, and I really enjoyed it, and we've enjoyed these very good relationships since then. So thank you very much again, Professor Kwadzi. And at this point, we want to ask people who have questions to ask, clarifications for Professor Kwadzi to make. This is the time. Dr. Irebu, I can see your hand is raised. You have the floor, please.
Thank you so much, Dr. Onanuga. And thank you, Prof, our presenter. Please, I want to ask, can we say concentration on a particular author or selected iconic authors, for instance, of an era like Achebe, Soyinka, Okigbo, Clark, and the rest? Can we say that is a focus? The prof, the presenter said if you write on this and write on that, you might not have you might lack a focus. Can we say a concentration on a particular author, writing diverse and various and perhaps not particularly related topics on that particular author? Can we call that a concentration of or a focus? Can we say it's a focus? I mean, one could choose to write on different topics of this or these selected authors. Do we see that as a focus? That might not be be subject to what you say, a loss of identity.
Okay.
She said,
I get your question. So the quick answer is that is good, but you have to be informed about the hundreds of articles that Soyinka scholarship can fill my whole house. Achebe Scholarship can fill my house and the house next door. It's huge. So you must be informed about what has been written to say something new, to say something original, to just give a good analysis of, Death and the King's Horseman. We've all read 10 of those. There was a question here. I hope that answers your question. There was a question here about the length of an article. That depends on the journal. That is one of the detective works you have to do. You have to see what each journal wants. Each journal will want different things, and you just have to do what they want. Yesterday, I was in a unhappy correspondence with a young man who said, I reject the fact that I have to limit myself to 8,000 words. My argument cannot be fitted. I'm sorry. That's it. 8,000 or not. I don't have the power to gift him 4,000 more words. I will have to take it from another author. So they're things that are just simply the rules. That's how it is.
Yeah, thank you very much. I can see Professor Mujala Teju is here with us, and our hand is raised. Prof. Ma, thank you for joining. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I just want to appreciate the last speaker, the presenter. It was very insightful. But I have two observations from what she contributed. She first mentioned the fact that it's not too good having joint publications that is not encouraged in the humanities. But I want to say that this area of multidisciplinary work and things like that, then how do you cooperate? How do you allow cooperation amongst people of different areas so that you can move forward and do something that is even better than somebody writing alone? So that's why many people want to collaborate. That is one. Then the second one is the idea of having to write or to collaborate with students, maybe PhD students and this, because many people feel that one of the ways by which you can really encourage the young people coming up, upcoming generation, is by collaborating with them, helping them, and then publishing with them, which is part of what they do in the sciences. So when you now said that it's not too good, I wonder how are we going to encourage, this upcoming generation, because many of them will discover a lot of things. Some of them don't know how to start, how to write and things like that, but by the time you put them through, maybe they'll be able to do better. So I don't know what you have to say about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Olateju. I'll have a quick comment because there's lots to say, and I see Prof. Taiwo and Prof. Schmidt have their hands up as well. These kinds of discussions like today, I think are a really good way to start to make networks. It's one of the things we want to do in the Lagos Studies Association as well, to create cohorts. Because if you read the acknowledgements of the people who win the prizes for their books, what is the thing that we read in the acknowledgements? Thank you to these 30 people who read my work from the beginning. And thank you to these 40 people who have consistently supported me. So we must support and encourage each other and have these kinds of discussions where we read each other's work, comment on each other's work. But my point remains that in the humanities publication, the single authored work in history, in literature, in cultural studies is the standard. It's the gold standard. It's what is desired, but it doesn't stop us from supporting each other and reading each other's work. I understand that there are, that different academic environments have different practices. So I'm not talking about the Nigerian Academy. I'm talking about journal publishing. Let me stop there.
Yeah, thank you very much. Professor Taiwo, please. I see there are lots of hands raised. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Kotze, for your presentation. I think one or two things struck me while you were making your presentation. Professor Olateju already spoke on one of them, which you have responded to. And of course, it will be odd in the humanities to find the kind of publications we have in the sciences where 4, 5, 6, 7 people team together to write a paper, because they always have a way of explaining that if you do an experiment and everyone who contributed to the work in one way or the other has to be reflected on the work, but that's not it's not typical in the, it's not even done in the humanities. So for me, anything beyond 2 authors in any humanities scholarship will be queried. That's my personal thinking. Then on this issue on paying to publish, I think a lot of our people need to hear this. Some don't believe that you can publish without paying for your papers, and the people who don't even have the money have to, spend a lot of money paying because they are desperate to get published. And like you said, I mean, those are 419 and the publishers, because some of them will write you specifically to ask you to submit a paper and all those things. And no good journal does that. So please, young people, learn that you can submit your papers in some of the best journals without paying any dime. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Prof. Professor Schmid, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. It is nice and good that I'll be the last to talk in this forum, because I can say I support everything that my 2 predecessors have said, except there are 2 issues that I would like to emphasize and qualify. One is that, of course, the conventions depend on the subdisciplines. That is the important point. And I have to admit that I have broken the record in authors, because I have published an article with 9 authors, and that was on the legal perspectives when we compare European, US, and Chinese data protection laws in social linguistics. So I obviously added the social linguistics theory, but there were several legal experts, several you would say artificial intelligence or data protection and data storage experts. And there, to be really honest, I would not have been able to do that myself. However, that was an exceptional big project, not only a publication project, a big project that basically earned us 12 million euros. So you can imagine how big that was and how many disciplines were involved. And that was interdisciplinary. And in some trends, we have to admit that natural and social science conventions come closer and closer into what we call humanities, and they hit the linguistics part before they hit the literature part. And that is the explanation for, digital humanities publication conventions, where, again, conventions are always changing. You have to look into the current journal conventions. And the other point that I wanted to add, also on the more technical side, is that when you have identified a journal that would be suitable for your publication, I would try... No, Maureen. I would try to really even adapt to the formal conventions. I always find it really difficult to accept suggestions, texts by African scholars with hardly any formatting. I would like to have an outline, a hierarchy in headlines, and I would like to have the conventions. If the journal has keywords, then I would like to see the keywords and the keywords related to the title, and the keywords, of course, sufficiently often referred to in the text. So a lot of these formalities take really an enormous amount of time, but that is really, really important and unfortunately necessary. You don't get a lot of credit for it sometimes, but the editors see immediately that this is a professional approach that is well prepared. And to be honest, it also is much less work for them. And you always have to consider that nowadays it is really difficult to find reviewers for journal articles. And if you meet the expectations in form, they can do it more quickly. And they do appreciate that with a positive general attitude towards your submission. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the additional information and the details. Finally, Abidin Amodu, your question. Thank you. Yeah, unmute yourself.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much. I would like to ask the speaker about, she talked about going back to debates, and she talked about situating the research where you are able to discuss what someone who is in the well-equipped library in New York would not be able to do. What is exceptional about that? Why that? Especially given this day and age where people seem to like, oh, we've dropped that in the past, we have moved on. Why is it important to go back to those debates? And the second question is around accessibility. Most of all these debates, like the ones I've been able to have access to, they are not even available on the internet. And people of my age, Gen Zs, when we do research, the first place it comes out is the internet. There are various tools, we acknowledge that. But these things, you don't even find them on the internet, you don't find them anywhere. And it costs money to transport yourself across various universities looking for research. And sometimes when they see young people like myself coming to ask questions, and oh, just leave it. It's not something you have to do. It's not something you should talk about. We already talked about that. Thank you.
If we can book a week and discuss all the comments you made, we would not run out of time. You've made really smart comments. And in a way, your question you answered with your second question. Why, if it's not on the internet? Because if it is on the internet, that person who doesn't need a generator, whose electricity is on all day, who has a desk in the library where the internet is on all day, she is always going to write the better article. So what I'm trying to do is to shift the world so that there's a way in which that person sitting in New York with the excellent internet and library resources is not always the winner. And the way to do that is to push against what is available on the internet, because someone with a good connection will always be the winner. So what I'm trying to do in my field, what I'm fighting for in my journal and in my field, is that the smell of the street, the experience of walking out into a market, the ability to go into a dusty archive, that those things make you the world famous scholar. Otherwise, all the experts are going to be in Boston and New York. And then what? Then we've lost everything. So my politics is always about the knowledge that is inaccessible to the person who can just ask Uncle Google. So I understand what you say about young people. I'm also trying to get young people off their computers, just back into the street, into life. There's walking out onto the street in Nigeria, 1,000 interesting things happen to you in 10 minutes. That is the world that I want to reflect and to theorize, rather than a clever article that can be written from the moon. So that's my politics. It's my particular politics. And also just, I will, this will be my last thing that I say.
Yeah.
the people in this room who have published with my journal will know I'm a bully. I will work you and work you and work you and work you because I'm not satisfied with just a good enough article. The reason I can publish many first-time authors, I can publish many Africa-based authors is because the quality is high. And to write high-quality articles, you revise many times. Dr. Onanuga will be able to tell you, I don't know how many times I made him revise. Go back, go back, go back. And then finally, okay, it's great. It's done. Now we go. And then it becomes the article that people have to reference. I want you to be the scholar writing on your topic that people have to reference.
Thank you very much. But well, there are some questions that I omitted from the chat and which I think would be unfair, not to read out very quickly for you. Yeah, so you addressed a number of them already about joint publications. Yeah, I think that has been dealt with. There's someone who's asking, Dr. Uga, who asks about, if in terms of...
I answered Dr. Uga privately.
Oh, you did?
And I know
okay,
her profile, and I said she's doing everything right. She's winning the prizes. She's got it. Yeah. So, I mean, that's done. And then the last one, which I think you also discussed in your presentation, was about, changing, publishing a chapter from a thesis, converting it to a journal article. I think you spoke about that earlier, but maybe 1 or 2 sentences about it again. I don't want to take too much time. You can hear I'm very passionate about these things. It's hard to shut me up again. But thesis to article, read articles. An article looks completely different from a thesis chapter. Read articles, read as many articles as you can to see what an article looks like.
Yeah, very succinct, and of course, the truth. Yeah, so we are making steady progress, and now it's time for the final presentation. So I would want to call on Ms. Ada Amechi to provide a short bio of Professor Joseph Schmid. Thank you.
All right. Joseph Schmid was the chair of English Language and Linguistics at Chemin's University of Technology from 1993 to 2021. His main research interests are in language and culture, sociolinguistics, English in Africa and East Asia, academic publishing, and in language and computers, for instance, corpus linguistics, e-learning, large language models. His current research projects focus on the synthesis and perception of artificial non-native accents, the use of internet data in linguistic analysis, innovation in remote online learning, disciplinary conventions of academic writing, and national and subnational variation of Englishes in Africa and China. He enjoys the academic discourse with his PhD students and Alexander von Boltz's guest professors. He was guest editor of several special issues of academic journals and published 20 volumes in his series Research in English and Applied Linguistics, Real. Example, Real 15, Academic Writing for Africa, the journal article. Göttingen, Colliver. Thank you. Cool.
Yeah, Professor Schmid, you have the floor. Thank you, Ms. Amechi.
Thank you. It is nice to be in Nigeria again, almost 30 years after my first visit. And the 2 famous IOs, Banjo and Bangbosche, published this volume then, when after the conference we had in Ibadan and after the nice trip I got through half of southwestern and northern Nigeria, even after after, yeah, almost. Even after I published my first book, English in Africa, which you can see here by Longman. And I have given the presentation that you'll see here to Paul Onanuga. However, I've also given him a copy of this book, which he can send round, or which you can download from the publisher, because nowadays we all agree, as the previous speaker Kali has said, that you should not have to pay for the basis of your work, that is the books that we are doing. Now, okay, we do it this way. I'll just ask you to forward, and I can do that from here. I thought you would share the screen, but it doesn't matter. On the screen, you could see more publications, but you can also see them on the relevant pages. Can you go back? There is one point I would like to emphasize here, and that I added, and that is, I think it is clear by now that a lot of the work that is necessary is done after the first draft. I would like to emphasize this, and this is why I said focus on editing and reviewing, and I added a keyword here, meta discourse, which I'll explain later. Okay, background, next slide. Some of my background is, Paul, next, is mainly in empirical linguistics, as you can see on the slide number 2, not 3. And here you can see, for instance, that I started with a corpus of East African English, and the latest is, if you want, the Twitter English collections, which we were able to do until recently. But I always like to emphasize that I'm very interested in African English, but also African English and publications by African scholars in a comparative, meaning European and Chinese perspective, so mainly non-native conventions. Next page. Yeah, so the background in publishing, I like to call this perspective global, because on the one hand, you have to say that I look at a text from a macro level, holistic, if you want, a bird's eye view. I'm not interested in small, typos or inconsistencies, but I'm also interested in the worldwide perspective, in similar, of course.
I was in a Zoom meeting.
And similar discipline-specific conventions. There are research books that are interested in this perspective, and I've given a few examples here, but there are also textbooks, some more from the British American perspective, like Swales and Feek, and some more from the European perspective, like Siepmann and Hanne and Mackenzie. So I think it is really important to see this from this wide perspective, and the perspective that I'm also using here is a new meaning of genres. If you're used to the literary meaning of genres, to me, research books, research articles, funding applications, or conference abstracts are the new genres, and they can be compared, for instance, in a new volume that I'll mention again later in a journal called Token, published in Europe, Italian and Polish cooperation. What I'm interested in is, in what way are there national disciplinary conventions, like Nigerian journals or conventions at Nigerian universities, and in what way are these conventions converging, because native and non-native writers from many different backgrounds can contribute to science English today, which is another important perspective in this context, and that is English as a lingua franca. Go on. Now, again, the focus. A lot of young scholars in particular underestimate that the macro part, so the planning of the work, takes considerable time, then writing, what I call drafting, and then editing. And I would like to emphasize that, as I say to all my students, PhD students, and even Paul knows Alexander von Humboldt guest professors, don't hand in your first draft. That is really important. And don't underestimate the editing work. There must also be a specific convention now that is different in books and in journals. There must be a substantial conclusion, for instance. In many cases, I see introductions that are much longer than conclusions, but there must be conclusions, and I'll give you examples of that in a moment. On. I see this as a hierarchy of academic writing. So student academic English means basically digesting research. Then doctoral, develop your own research, and then research English for academic purposes is participating in the research discourse, which is international. And that includes peer review procedures and the corresponding discourse. The stereotypical genre here is the research article, which is so important for our academic careers. Next. You can always read the details about, MLA conventions or APA conventions later if you want. I see academic writing as an old and a new field at the same time. The old medieval and very traditional rhetoric, the art of persuasion, is, in my view, much more than traditional figures of speech. It is something that is sometimes called new rhetoric, and it means academic writing is a theoretical and a practical field, and we all need to be aware of these conventions in all the text types and genres that we use. It is important that we see that the theoretical basis here is academic writing is an initiation into the culture and practices of the discourse communities that we work in. This is why we have to read and study the journals that we want to publish in. And we see this from a social constructionist point of view. Writing is always a personal and social cultural act of identity, whereby writers both signal their membership in a range of communities as well as express their own creative presence. On. The main concept I'm using here is meta-discourse. So we look at all the linguistic devices that assist writers to organize propositions and present them in a way that will be easily understood by readers. And I have to add, it also allows the readers to develop their identity as writers. This is just a few examples from Highland, who made good contributions here. And for instance, I would like to emphasize the importance of stance. You must find your own standpoint in a specific issue, and then you must put that into global rhetorical structures and the consistent argumentation of all the parts, the headers, the titles, the sections, the keyword, etc. You can also see, by the way, from this presentation that I like to have a really hard background structure in all the presentations. I think that is in linguistics, again, much more necessary than in literary studies. On. And because we would like to emphasize this academic research cycle, And we want to create new knowledge, of course, but we want to make sure that this knowledge goes through a quality assurance cycle. And that's why all these peer reviews are so important. And I'm going to say more about that later. Okay. Now, next. I don't want to read these definitions of a genre. You can just go with me through the blue parts. So genres are communicative events governed by a communicative purpose, highly structured and conventionalized constructs. They are related to a particular professional community, and they reflect the needs of the disciplinary and organizational cultures. Next. And here you have a few examples. The research article sticks out in red here because that is the most important aspect. In Germany, even traditional PhD theses are subdivided into 4 or 5 research articles in hard scholarly articles and a relatively short frame around it. So even a PhD thesis may be phased out from natural sciences to social sciences to humanities, as we mentioned before. And these articles are not so much author-specific, but discipline-specific. Okay? Here I have tried in one of my publications to show you the importance of genres. Of course, the research article is in the center, and for many scholars, the BA, MA, and PhD theses are important for their career, but maybe that is going to change. And of course, I also like to emphasize again that reviews and responses to reviews are really important here. In a different perspective now, I would like to emphasize that the global argumentative organization is important. And here you see something from Wikipedia. In this case, it is a good starting point because Wikipedia emphasizes this UMBRA tradition: introduction, methods, results, and discussion. And you can also see this wine glass there at the bottom, which is a general research scheme that you can pursue in research books as well as in research articles, not in textbooks, I mean. Okay, we move on. And here I'm giving you my modified version. In this case, I call it IMAC, and that's supposed to be a joke. And the A at the beginning stands for abstract. I always think it is really good to have an abstract and a convincing abstract that really encourages everyone to go on, and in extreme cases sounds so good that you really make an effort, and in the long run you even may have to spend some money on it, although we definitely want to avoid that. Then the introduction I changed to issue. What is the issue? What is new? What is relevant? Or in what way is this more focused than others? And on the right-hand side, you see some of these key phrases that can be used as indicators. And that means many editors and, of course, also PhD supervisors want to be able to find these keywords, to read through the texts quickly, to check what they expect, and whether their expectations are met. So under methodology, for instance, an important part is previous research, a literature review, and stance evaluation. Maybe you also develop a research hypothesis. You talk about the database and the procedures that you want to follow. The analysis can be quite, switch off your microphone or your camera. The emphasis can be quite different. In some cases, just examples are enough evidence. In other cases, you really have to provide statistical tables. In, again, other cases, you have to calculate significance levels using chi-square. And again, I said the introduction is important, but the conclusion is often too short. And conclusion may mean summary, it may mean interpretation. It may mean a contextualization in one perspective, or that it's quite clever. It may contain limitations, and that means that leads you into an outlook. That means further research is necessary, but if you can give more concrete suggestions, that is good here. Move on. This is an example of not the number, but of this journal that I mentioned. We are editing a new volume that will come out in November this year. And this is one of the structures that is included, a comparison of MA thesis, and you can see that the structure is quite rigid. It is exactly this IMRAT that we were talking about. And you can also see that this is the hierarchy from a style sheet, yeah, where you can open chapter 3 and then you get 3 subsections, etc., etc. So style sheet that I think gives a very quick survey and gives the professional atmosphere that you want. Next. Now, again, you may say, you know, just writing introduction, data collection and analysis, that's too stupid. Okay, maybe you can find a compromise. Yeah, for data collection, you can say, I used university repositories in South Africa. Stellenbosch, for instance, has a nice university repository for all MA theses, or in the European Union, there is this Clarine initiative where they encourage everyone to submit their data to the database so that other following researchers can either reuse the data or maybe even verify the results, etc. So a lot of these hierarchies and outlines in this global organization can be, on the one hand, stereotypical expectations, and on the other hand, a bit more specific so that they don't get too boring. Next. Here, another example, and you can see a modern online journal, and I really love the title, A Semantically Annotated Corpus of Tombstone Inscriptions. Has the abstract, and on the right-hand side, it has these headlines already, and that is, of course, good when these make a meaningful sequence, as it is the case here. Of course, I'm suggesting only open source journals, so journals that are accessible and that you can reproduce. So you have, you know, a receptive and a productive opportunity here. Next. Yeah. Mixed methods is always a good starting point, but again, you see this is International Journal of Digital Humanities, and the online journal have all these, you know, altmetrics and metrics things that give you indications of whether this is a good model for your own article. Next. Good. We skipped the exercises, but you can do the exercises. Sorry, we skipped. Go back. We skipped the exercises. You don't have to do it, but you can look at it later. And in this case, I just wanted to make sure that you see that the title, the abstract, the keywords, and maybe even some of the references are a logical unit. It is really, really important to bear that in mind, because if this is all the your reader has as a starting point, it must look coherent, and that we will talk about later. Okay. Now, this coherence, as I've said, depends or is important because you want to persuade the reader to read on. So the title, abstract, and keywords must be a true summary, if you want, of the entire text. You can decide whether you prefer to have research questions or hypotheses, but these questions must also be answered at the end. And in some cases, some of the questions cannot be answered. So that is always a tricky point. If you have questions, you must be able to answer them in a convincing way. And then, of course, we've heard that in some cases, the literature is endless. So don't add a bibliography. I can download that via EndNote in no time from the Library of Congress, but only take the references and do switch off your microphone. Next. Marikuba, switch off your microphone. Yeah. Now, if you want a bit of pure simple linguistics, of course, some explicit cohesive devices, that means it is good to put them in, and it is also good to avoid some of the stereotypes. So for instance, for additive cohesive devices, you can always use and, but of course it is more elaborate when you use in addition. Or for adversative, contrastive, conjunct, you can use but. But, however, I found it interesting that other things are available, even unfortunately, and I've put that into quotation marks here, because a lot of people might say there is no fortune in an academic article, but here the point is that unfortunately means, in this context, contrary to expectations, contrary to research hypotheses, etc. And then causal, don't always write, because since and other more specific semantic versions are possible. Next. Here, I have just added a few things that may be interesting from an African perspective. I have looked at 2 Kenyan, 2 Tanzanian, 1 Cameroonian, and 1 UK scholarly article, and just looked at these adjuncts. And the interesting part was there were more of these adjuncts in the African texts than in the UK text. And that raises the question whether when we teach, like I teach meta discourse, can we do too many of these signaling devices and thus be non-native like? But I think it is quite okay if you want to be specific, you are specific, you don't have to follow native examples. Okay, move on. Now we talk about reviews. Of course, there are many popular definitions of reviews. I've taken these from different parts of the Wikipedia. Here they have scholarly reviews, which you can read, but I'm going to explain that in the next slide. In this slide, you can see there are so many sub-genres of reviews. We are interested in the left-hand side. We have academic reviews, meaning researcher to researcher. And we have, for instance, professional reviews, expert to expert. And that is important for our conference contribution or for our journal contribution. We do not discuss too much the literature review that is often very extensive, so that a novice can show that to the expert that she has digested all these things that were written before. Next. Yeah, the standard is double-blind peer reviews. This is important, or has been important since the 1950s, and it is expanding. Most double-blind peer reviews are anonymous and unpublished, so it is always difficult to do a corpus and do an analysis of them, but in some cases it works in some organizations, and I think that is a general trend. Reviews will become accessible to everyone on the internet, and that is a good opportunity for us. Let's go quickly. Next. Here you can see in my visualization the idea that an author submits something to an editor of a journal or an organizer of a conference. Conference organizers usually use this easy abstract, but in any case, the organizer or the editor give the text to two reviewers, so they get two opinions. Of course, it is always up to them to decide, but there's always a final judgment that is important. And I think accept as is really rare. Revise plus minor corrections or rewrite plus major corrections are always important. And a positive aspect for the authors, let me emphasize that, so that the feedback the authors get is part of their work, and it's a very important part of the work. It helps them to produce an even better text. And of course, it is much better if we are warned before the publication than if our readers say after the publication that this was not a good article. And the double blind, as you can see here, means, of course, that the author does not know the reviewer, and the reviewer does not know the author. The editor or organizer has to be diligent enough to delete all these traces. Next. Here, again, if you want a bit of an exercise, this is from a specific online review procedure, and I have marked in yellow something that could be called politeness. I have marked in blue something that could be called reducing distance, or making or using informal language that show that the reviewer does not want to be too aggressive, and of course then the fair distribution of praise and in green and criticism in red. There's one aspect that I would like to emphasize here, and that is, I think, in this trend of online reviews, the last line, there's always a confidence scale. So the reviewer has to admit that how confident they are about the evaluation, or whether, this is really central through their research experience, or it is only marginal. You can see confidence level 3, confidence level 5 would mean you really have to take this expert seriously, because he knows much more probably than you as an author. Next. Almost there. Just 2 pages on conclusion. So I think that old genres are adapted to technical and societal changes. I've just hinted at it with a new online journals. Of course, these technical affordances are new opportunities, and we can use these new techniques. And it is also important for us for electronic data collection and analysis. However, let me emphasize again that I think with the advent of online reviews in particular, it is really important that you do not only learn to write good articles, you also have to learn to write good reviews, polite, with mitigations, etc., etc. So I think in this societal context, there is public funding, and then the access indicators are conference contributions when you're accepted, and reviews. That means you're a successful scholar. And a lot of these publication procedures are becoming more transparent. The criteria according to which journals and conference contributions are evaluated are more or less explicit. And of course, all this contributes to the intellectual discourse. Finally here, not just one here, all the scholarly work should be made accessible in repositories, European Clarin, or let me emphasize again, ResearchGate and Academia Edu. Academia Edu is also the same as ResearchGate, although they have the wrong URL. The problem is that, of course, you cannot upload your journal articles for copyright reasons usually, and that means a lot of well-meaning scholars upload only the last but one version, so the proofs that they get into ResearchGate. But that is something to get material, and recent material in particular, that is very important for young scholars. And next, finally, researchers, we've said, observe their discourse community. You can follow the conventions in Confucius style, or you can reject the conventions in cowboy style. Both may be successful, but you have to know the rules to break them effectively. Okay, there are still some issues in this context. And for instance, we have to ask ourselves whether these conventions are becoming more and more similar to Anglo-American dominance, although nowadays there are also, European and African gatekeepers and guidebook publications. We have to ask ourselves how much culture-specific divergence we want to accept in research English, and we have to ask ourselves which features we want to reduce, maybe redundancy, and which features we want to increase, maybe explicitness or cohesion, which I pointed out. Remember, there are no native speakers, writers of academic English. Everyone has to learn that, and the discourse community conventions are changing with technological affordances and societal demands, and young researchers have to observe these conventions and their changes. Okay, this is just a few references, and the last page is the title again. so that you can ask me questions. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Schmidt, for your engaging discussion on language use and research, paying particular attention to discourse, orientation there. And you've told us to show ourselves in our writings. I mean, in terms of stance, engagement, and use of language. It's also necessary to read existing studies and be grounded in the conventions of these forms of academic writing. And more importantly, again, you insist that we shouldn't submit the first draft because there is still so much to do on it. And of course, after these, the work goes through a significant review process before which you can say that you are really ready for a publication. I found very interesting your the dimension to research English and academic writing, and I think it holds a lot of it's something that a lot of people will find resonating with their activities as researchers. And so maybe I start the questioning to say that, I mean, academic writing, research English, I know you've done a lot of work on corpus analysis of academic writings, and yeah, to inform everybody, I'll be sharing the document that Professor Schmidt graciously made available to us. I'll share very soon on the chat so that you can download directly. But in terms of academic writing now and research English, like you said, and of course relating this to the idea of gatekeepers in terms of in the publishing world, what would you say from your experience? How would you, for instance, if you are called as a reviewer of a submission, maybe a submission that came in from Tanzania or from Kenya or even from Nigeria, and you have to, navigate this through your lens of English as a German European academic writer? What kind of things do you look out for? What kind of things would you say, oh, this doesn't fit, or this? I mean, taking note of the nuances that exist within this,
Yeah, that's a good question. I personally, as you know, I'm quite generous in many small formalities. So I don't mind if you emphasize, we discuss about this, which is theoretically wrong according to traditional guidebooks. But I would like to see a relatively clear structure. And as we've heard before, if an article starts with, Nigeria is a big country somewhere in the west of the African continent, then you can forget about the next chapter already. So if you can express something in fewer words equally well, that I would do, and I would call that a reduction of redundancy. You must take for granted that your readers are interested in the area and have read similar articles in the same or similar journals. So you better use, references instead of adding textbook knowledge. Adding textbook knowledge is something that I see in many African contributions, and I would say the basic distinction between a textbook, a handbook, and a research book, three genres that have the same name or similar names, but very different functions. That's important. So the handbook written by experts is the basis, not the textbook of your literature review. And these conventions, what is expected in this journal, okay, there are always, more empirical parts, and you've noticed that my research is usually data-based and empirical, but in general, clarification of key concepts. The key concepts that are mentioned and the key words, for instance, that must be done really beautifully, diligently, to make it easier for the reader So the editor is responsible for avoiding the reader wasting their times. So that is an important aspect that I would always focus on.
Yeah, thank you very much, Prof. There was this question on the chat earlier. Maybe this goes to everybody interested out of the three presenters, but the person is asking for the place of book chapters and saying that it's gradually being discouraged within the Nigerian space because more emphasis is actually placed on journal publications. And maybe this will lead to my own other question, which is what you think, or what other presenters also think about. I think in Nigeria, particularly, of course, in Nigerian academia, there is more focus on journal publications. And now that we are talking about, publishing books, it looks like it's a daunting task. And so maybe you can share some of your personal experiences in terms of how you did your first book. I know it's a common practice in Europe and in the US to have, to publish a book. And maybe Professor Taiwo can weigh book publication and how would you encourage younger scholars or researchers to do theirs too? Thank you.
Maybe I can start. As I said before, the trend is to replace PhD theses where the trend is taught shorter, but to replace them entirely by 4 or 5 publications that are available in hard academic journals. That depends on the discipline, and maybe a summarizing portmanteau, an explanatory, relatively short article. I'm not sure what to think of that occasionally, because the problem is that writing a 200-page text is really a skill, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of good personal planning to achieve that. So in a way, I would not really do away with a PhD thesis as a whole. And I would say it really depends on the discipline. However, it is really important to say that even a PhD thesis is not a book, and a textbook is not a research book. You must really find the appropriate model or the appropriate series, and then use again the conventions that you've studied well in this context.
Thank you very much. I don't know if Professor Taiwo and Professor Kodzi can also share their ideas or experiences about turning one's research into a book publication. You both have well-regarded texts, and I mean, this can be useful advice for the rest of us here. Yeah.
Well, my own experience, like we've already been told, I mean, to turn a dissertation to a textbook or a book, I mean, the formatting has to change. There are so many things that you need to, work on. So it can't go exactly the way it is as a thesis straight for, I mean, to be published as a book. Textbooks have a specific language, and thesis has its own language. And in thesis, you're expected to talk about the certain things. There are certain aspects of the thesis that are just given. You have to talk about some things like contribution to knowledge, and all those things might not really feature as such in a book. And then each chapter will actually, for my own part, the chapterization will even be completely different because the findings are really the issues you want to project, and not really some of the, all these procedures that you went through before you eventually you end the analysis and then you present the analysis. So, I mean, a lot of things will definitely change, and that's what I did when I turned PhD thesis into a book.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Professor Kwasi?
I'll just add to what the previous two speakers have said. A thesis is very institutionally bound. Every university or academic culture requires a thesis to look a certain way. If I read an article, I can tell you generally if that person was trained at UI or at Makerere or at Cape Town. There's a language that you can pick up. So for the thesis, one is trying to please your supervisor, you're trying to please your committee, you're writing for about 5 people. But a book goes into the world as an orphan. You don't know where someone is going to open that book. And so a book has to be able to transcend the local politics and the local conventions, which are appropriate for a thesis, but the monograph travels the world on its own. So it's really different in that way. It has to be able to speak to a reader that you've never met, who is approaching things from a different culture. So in a committee where I sit, where we evaluate book proposals, 2 of the committee members say that a thesis cannot be submitted just like that and become a monograph. We have this debate every now and then about whether that really is such a hard rule. But a book, a monograph, is a completely different thing from a thesis.
Thank you so much. I mean, I found this interesting. A book goes into the world as an orphan, and very insightful. Yeah, so we are gradually getting to the end of this, but I have to say thank you to everybody who's been here with us from the start till now. I have to say thank you to Professor Wale Adegbite. Prof, thank you for being in attendance. You are, if we'll say in academic circles, I mean, you'll be my great-grandfather. Professor Olateju, Professor Christine Ufulue, Professor Babalola, Dr. Bakari. I mean, it's been great sharing these hours with everybody. We appreciate your attendance, and we are really grateful that this has been a success. We spent so much time, so I just want to call my head of department to give concluding remarks, and then we can call this a day.
All right, thank you, Dr. Nonuga. Thank you very much, everyone who has been present. I would like to give a very brief closing remark. On behalf of the Vice Chancellor and on behalf of the Dean of the Faculty of Arts, I would like to thank everyone who made the second webinar of the Department of English and Literary Studies a success. Our sincere appreciation goes to our speakers. Professor Rotimi Taiwo, we are very grateful. Professor Kali Kotse, thank you very much. And Emeritus Professor Joseph Schmidt, we are very, very grateful. Thank you for making our time to enrich us in terms of research and scholarship. Let me also thank everyone that participated online. We are grateful. We hope that you have had a very good time, and we hope you have been able to update your knowledge on research, development, and quality outputs. Your attendance has added color to this event, and we're grateful that you were able to make it. In the Department of English and Literary Studies, Federal University Oye-Ekiti, our vision is to become a center of excellence, academic excellence, where the staff members are forces to reckon with in terms of academia, in terms of their output, and we want them to be equipped for excellent delivery of their duties. We also want to remain in knowledge of our students, where they are trained to acquire communication skills and effective mastery of English language related research in lines with global standards. All doing very well, they're doing us proud, and we want to sustain this tempo. In addition, we are open to international opportunities in terms of research collaboration and postdoctoral opportunities for our colleagues. We'll be delighted to benefit from academic funding, workshops, conferences, and other research-related opportunities. We are a group of young scholars. Many of us are quite young, so we are open to academic opportunities all over the world. We also hope to help our students develop their skills in order to be able to thrive in a globalized world. Therefore, we have recently started a library initiative where we hope to have a number of books on contemporary research in languages and linguistics, African studies, literature, and other fields in the humanities. We are presently taking book donations and also any form of donation in line with this. We are very grateful once again. Thank you very much for coming out to encourage us. Thank you for teaching us. We hope this would encourage us to host the third departmental webinar very soon, and we'd like to see each and every one of us there again. Thank you, and we wish you all the best in your endeavors. Bye.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, I've been trying to attach the document from Professor Schmid. I haven't been able to do that. Maybe I'll create an online platform and then I'll share so that people can access from there. So we will share just the way we shared the information about this, event so that people can access this and any other documents that are available. I've shared the link provided by Professor Kodzi. We are really grateful for your presence today. I mean, Professor Taiwo, Professor Kodzi, Professor Schmid, and we appreciate the efforts that you've made in, growing the research community. So as a goodbye, maybe we can all activate our videos to say bye-bye and look forward to the next webinar. Thank you.
Being told.
So,
bye. Take care.
Yeah, bye.
Atutalon.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, so we'll share the next one once it's ready. Yeah, thank you.